Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. At least 7 Palestinians killed as Israeli troops raid the West Bank city of Jenin.
Our other headlines: tens of thousands of people line the streets for the funeral procession of Iran's President Ebrahim Raisi, killed on Sunday in a helicopter crash.
French President Emmanuel Macron heads to New Caledonia as foreigners flee the worst unrest in the Pacific Territory in more than 30 years.
And the UK government promises what it's calling comprehensive compensation to the thousands of victims of the infected blood scandal. At least 7 Palestinians, including a teacher, a doctor and a student, have been killed during an Israeli Defense Forces raid in the West Bank city of Jenin.
Israeli military forces moved into the Jenin refugee camp early on Tuesday. They say they killed a number of what they called Palestinian terrorists.
Clashes erupted between some armed groups and the IDF. These are reported as continuing. Several schools in the refugee camp have been evacuated.
The undercover forces raided the area suddenly, and they were firing at any moving body in the street. You can see among those killed was a doctor, teachers and students. These are the martyrs. The injuries were mostly concentrated in the thighs, the chest and the head. They were targeting anything moving. As you can see, the ambulances were targeted too.
Let's talk to our correspondent, Jonathan Regev, who's in Tel Aviv. So, Jonathan, give us an update. What's been happening in Jenin?
Yes, quite a strong operation by the IDF on Tuesday morning in the Jenin refugee camp. As you mentioned, the numbers so far are 7 people killed. As far as Israel is concerned, most of those targeted were militants, but there is an understanding in Israel that not all those killed were militants. There were civilians among them. The Israeli army will investigate this, and the notion is what the Israeli army is claiming is that just the same as what is happening in Gaza, in Jenin as well, in the refugee camp. Many of those militants are entrenching themselves within civilian infrastructures, such as schools, such as mosques, such as any other civilian infrastructure, hospitals. That is why we can find a doctor and possibly students among those killed. It was quite a large operation in the Jenin refugee camp, and again, as far as Israel is concerned, we may be speaking constantly of 2 fronts, Gaza and the Lebanon border, but as far as Israel is concerned, the West Bank front, the West Bank arena is constantly ongoing. The operation dubbed Breaking the Wave, which actually began more than 2 years ago, is constantly ongoing with practically nightly operations, mostly in the area of Jenin in the northern West Bank, but not only there, also in places like Nablus, like Tulkarem, and even further south in the West Bank in Hebron. So these are actions by the Israeli military that are constantly ongoing, along with the war on the other fronts.
And there's been some criticism for Israel after it seized equipment from the Associated Press. What more can you tell us?
That is correct, and the criticism this time coming also from within Israel itself. The story is that some AP equipment was confiscated in the city of Sderot, which sits right on the Gaza border. That equipment was filming the Gaza border and distributed to the hundreds of media outlets around the world which rely on the Associated Press for live coverage. One of those outlets is Al Jazeera. Al Jazeera has been banned from broadcasting out of Israel due to what Israel calls their very biased journalistic line. That decision by itself was quite controversial, though welcomed quite by most Israelis, but confiscating AP material, AP cameras, simply because one of those using their services is Al Jazeera, that is being criticized. And once again, not only around the world, but also in Israel itself. The head of the opposition, Yair Lapid, already claiming that this is an outrageous move done by the Ministry of Communications, as far as we understand, without consulting the Prime Minister's office. We've not heard anything from the Prime Minister's office, from Benjamin Netanyahu himself. No comment yet from their part regarding this move. We're also hearing from the White House that they're concerned about this. Let's remember, the Associated Press, an American outlet, the largest news provider, the largest agency in the world. And this move is clearly creating a lot of criticism at a time when Israel clearly does not need that. Israel is constantly looking for justifications for its war, a war which Israel sees as a very justified war. I'm not sure that a move such as confiscating AP equipment, which provides services to outlets all over the world, yes, including Al Jazeera, I'm not sure this is something that would paint Israel in very bright colors.
Jonathan, thank you very much. Our correspondent, Jonathan Regev in Tel Aviv.
Well, that's the picture from Israel. Our correspondent, Akram Al-Satari, is in Gaza.
The Israeli attacks are continuous in the Gaza Strip. They're targeting different parts of the Gaza Strip, and every single airstrike or every single artillery fire or every single quadcopter attack marks the continuation and the expansion of the ground operation that is taking place in Rafah. Around 2 hours ago, 3 children were killed by an Israeli artillery fire that targeted them. Around 1 hour and a half, 6 people were killed in the Gaza Strip. Around 1 hour ago, the Masjid al-Khulafa area in Jabalia was targeted by the Israeli occupation forces with heavy bombardment that is still continuous up to this particular moment. So the escalation is still taking place. The ground operation is expanded in Rafah. More people are killed, more people are injured, more infrastructures are destroyed, and more is expected to take place as long as the Israeli sources speak about the expansion and the approval of that expansion, and about them mobilizing all the tanks and armored vehicles and also the Air Force towards attacking Rafah, attacking Gaza North, and achieving the military goals that they have been talking about for the last 7 or 8 months.
France and Germany say they support the independence of the International Criminal Court after it requested arrest warrants for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his Defence Minister Yoav Gallant.
The ICC also asked for arrest warrants for senior Hamas leaders. The move has received a rather mixed response from the EU. Our correspondent Will Denslow is in Brussels. Will, so EU leaders don't agree on this course of action from the International Criminal Court?
Jamie, that's absolutely right, and we've heard from Josep Borrell, the EU's Foreign Affairs chief, who's really sent out a reminder on social media saying that all nations that have ratified ICC statutes are bound by court decisions. Of course, it is up to the ICC court to make a determination whether to go along with the ICC prosecutors' request to send out arrest warrants to the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel's defense minister, as well as several Hamas leaders. And if we get to that point, and it is certainly a big if at this point, that would be a bitter pill for some European nations to swallow. Some that are, of course, signed up to the Rome Statute. Nations like Czechia, for example. We've heard from the country's foreign minister reacting to the ICC prosecutor's decision to request these arrest warrants, stating that it was appalling and completely unacceptable. Some other members of the EU, though, have a very different response, the likes of the Belgian foreign minister taking to social media, saying they stand with the ICC's decision and support their moves going forward. That just gives you a little sense of the fractures within the bloc when it comes to this particular issue. Really compounding that is the fact that there are reports that potentially as many as 5 nations within the EU could be taking steps soon to officially recognise the statehood of Palestine.
Well, let's just put the Middle East conflict to one side for a moment, because EU members have now formally agreed to use frozen Russian assets to fund Ukraine's military effort. Do we know how that money is going to be spent?
Jamie, we do have a sense of that. This was something that was really given a provisional nod and sign of approval by the 27 EU members earlier this month. That has now been green-lit. And we've heard from the Czech foreign minister saying that Russia must pay for damage done by its war of aggression. So a strong comment there when it comes to the significance of the EU's decision. When it comes to how this funding will be spent, this is over $3 billion. This isn't directly from Russian coffers. This is purely the interest accumulated by Russia's foreign assets of this year alone to the tune of just over that $3 billion. 90% of that funding, we're told by EU officials, will go towards military operations. 10% will go towards Ukrainian reconstruction efforts going forward as well. This has been a contentious issue. Some warn that this could set a dangerous precedent. Some warn that it could be seen as the euro going forward being seen as less of a safe currency. That was certainly a message we've heard repeatedly from Russian officials, saying it was the final nail in the European economy's coffin. So strong rhetoric there from the Kremlin. And as far as Kiev, well, they believe that this is a good step, but certainly not enough. They want to see more than the $3 billion of interest. They want to see the more than $200 billion used of frozen Russian assets going towards Ukraine's war effort. Jamie?
Well, thank you for that. Our correspondent Will Denslow in Brussels.
Our correspondent Dasha Chernysheва has more from Moscow.
Well, we're waiting for the Kremlin to give its reaction to the latest development, but all along the way, as this issue has been discussed, Moscow has been saying that the use of profits from the frozen Russian assets will be undermining the basis of international law. That's according to Dmitry Peskov, Kremlin's spokesman. He was saying that there will be no trust in this international law and in the European as well as the US American financial systems that will be leading to the foreign investors actually fleeing from those markets. He also reiterated that Moscow will be seeking a response, saying that there is a lot of Western money stationed in Russia. So certainly Moscow will be working out a way that will benefit Russia as well in this situation. At the same time, Moscow is expected to be bringing this case to the international courts, all sorts of courts, and it will take years for the European countries to be present in those processes. At the same time, we understand that the Kremlin insists it is on the upper footing when it comes to the situation in Ukraine. But the Kremlin on Tuesday is saying that Vladimir Zelensky in Ukraine finds its army in deeply unfavorable conditions, and that makes him ask for more and more military aid from the Western countries. But having said that, Kremlin spokesman also reiterated that even if there is the steady rhyme of the deliveries of this military aid to Ukraine, that will not be changing the situation on the ground. So all in all, it does look like this new round of the development when it comes to the international sanctions now concerning the Russian frozen assets is not really bothering the Kremlin to change the course of its operation in Ukraine.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, thousands line the streets to mourn Iran's President Ebrahim Raisi, killed in a helicopter crash on Sunday.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
I think it should be more global cooperation.
I would like to hear more the voice of the developing countries.
Globalization has lifted more than 1 billion people out of poverty.
The green transition has to happen. It's a necessity.
Well, China and the United States are important powers in the world.
What unites us is much more than what divides us. And I believe China is committed to this agenda.
Join me, Juliet Mann, to set the agenda at these times every weekend on CGTN.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
One more offensive in a long line of battles that's been ongoing for more...
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots. Excuse us, excuse us.
The world today matters for your world tomorrow.
The number of casualties is growing quickly.
Why, this is one of the hardest hit towns in the region.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. Tens of thousands of people have lined the streets for the funeral procession of Iran's President Ebrahim Raisi, who was killed on Sunday in a helicopter crash. Foreign Minister Hossein Amir Abdollahian and 7 others also died.
Their bodies have now arrived in Tehran before a prayer ceremony on Wednesday, expected to be led by the Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Our correspondent Mahdi Abbasin is in Tehran.
To say that the bodies of the late President of the Islamic Republic of Iran, President Ebrahim Raisi, who tragically died in a helicopter crash on Sunday, arrived in Tehran a couple of hours ago to the Mehrabad airport of Tehran, and then there was a parade, military parade there in the honor of him and his accompanying delegation. They were then transferred to the city of Qom in central Iran, where there will be another funeral procession with the presence of people. At night, it is expected that the body of the late president and his accompanying delegation will be transferred to the capital, Tehran, again, and there will be a mass, let's say, farewell ceremony in Tehran's Grand Mosalla. Also, I have to say that tomorrow morning, Iran's leader, Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei, will lead the burial prayers of the late president and his accompanying delegation, and then he will be moved to his hometown, Mashhad.
A Greek judge has dismissed the case against 9 Egyptian men accused of causing a shipwreck that killed hundreds of migrants last year. Our correspondent Evangelo Sipsas reports on what this development now means.
Well, the 9 people who have been accused since last year, they actually have been also detained and remained in prison for almost a year now. The accusations against them have been dropped. They are released simply because the Greek court could not try them because the incident that happened last June, in June of 2023, off the coast of Pylos, from the shipwreck, happened in international waters. That's what the court said. That's what the defendants' lawyers have been saying since day one of their clients, that simply these 9 nationals, Egyptian nationals, cannot be tried into Greek court because the incident took place in international waters. Now, there are hundreds of people outside the courtroom, but also a number of people inside the courtroom. When the verdict came out, they started chanting, they're clapping. You can see smiles on people's faces. A lot of NGOs, a lot of human rights organizations. What they said was simply the same as the court and the lawyers' defendants said. But also now what they're saying is that they want to focus somewhere else, to the people who are really responsible for this case, who they say are the Hellenic Coast Guard and the Greek government. Simply, they're accusing the Hellenic Coast Guard that at the day of the incident, they are in action, and the tampering of recording of video, but also audio recording, they're in fault. They're the ones who did not provide the support in time. They were not there to rescue the people, to turn off the cameras of the Hellenic Coast Guard boats. That's what the NGOs and opposition party leaders have been saying. And now that what they want is, they want that these people who were part of that rescue mission in last June of 2023 during the shipwreck, to be brought to justice, to be brought in front of international court, because as they say, they're the ones who are really responsible for this. Now, I'd like to remind here that last June, the shipwreck was carrying about 750 people from Libya, and as the defendants were saying to Italy, there have been 82 bodies that have been recovered, 100 people rescued, and it's believed that the rest of those are still missing in that shipwreck. Now, the defendants who have been released will still remain in prison. They will be here in Greece until it will be decided where they're going to be judged, whether it's going to be an international court or it's going to be somewhere else.
NGOs have filed a criminal complaint against French oil giant Total Energy and its major shareholders. They want them to go on trial for a string of charges, including involuntary manslaughter. TotalEnergies is also being accused of deliberately endangering the lives of others, neglecting to address a disaster and damaging biodiversity.
And staying in France, the pharmaceutical company Sanofi has announced it's joining forces with the artificial intelligence company OpenAI and the US biotech firm Formation Bio. Sanofi says the collaboration will allow access to data to develop AI models and accelerate drug development. This partnership marks the first of its kind within the pharma and life sciences industries.
The US department store Macy's has been investing in new products, displays and customer experiences in an attempt to turn around its fortunes. But has it worked? Let's talk to our correspondent John Terrett on Wall Street. So don't keep us in suspense, John. How did Macy's do in their first quarter results?
Well, I like talking about Macy's mainly because it's a bellwether. Bing! It's a bell, you see, and it gives us a good indication of what's happening in the US economy because it is so big. It is a huge nationwide chain of stores. The big one straddles 7th Avenue and Broadway at Herald Square. That really is one of the biggest stores in the world. And then they have lots of stores dotted all over the country. Now, the thing is, they're also responsible here for the Thanksgiving Day parade in November and the 4th of July fireworks coming up in just a couple of months' time. And by the way, they're moving to the Hudson River again, the big river in New York, back from the East River, where they've been for the last couple of years. But that's beside the point. Macy's is really a store, okay? And they've just given us their earnings, and essentially they beat Wall Street expectations, but their sales were still lower again. In other words, same-store sales, SSS, which means stores open for more than a year, they were down as we expected, but they were better than Wall Street had been anticipating. And they also managed to get more wealthier clients through the doors, which I assume they did through their Bloomingdale's outlet. They own Bloomingdale's, which is a very similar store, and also a company called Blue Mercury, which is actually a makeup store. So what to do about Macy's? The thing is, it's facing stiff competition. It has a new CEO, and time is running out for him to get things done. He's going to have to make a decision to decide what he wants to do with this once venerable company. Is he going to turn it round and make it a really great place to go again? Because at the moment, the Macy's store on Herald Square, Broadway, that's well worth going to see if you're in town. But the other Macy's stores dotted around the country, they're a bit hit and miss, to be honest with you, when it comes to the shopping experience. So are they going to improve that, turn it round, or are they going to accept a takeover? Now, there are a number of activist investors out there, including one called Art House Management, who've offered $6 billion for the whole shooting match. Well, $6 billion for the whole Macy's thing is like nothing at all. And here's the thing that people don't understand about Macy's. You think it's all about shopping, don't you? Yes, wrongo. It's not. It is about shopping, of course, but it's also about land. Because Macy's owns tons of land all over the United States. Those big stores out in the heartlands, the massive car parks. This is the thing that makes them more valuable than $6 billion. So we'll see. The trouble with Macy's is it's lost 25% of its market share in the last 25 years or so to very, very stiff competition. They're about to close 150 stores. They'll still have about 400 stores left. Wall Street thinks the best way to go is not a takeover, try and stave the activist investors off, but instead go for a smaller company. Just trim the whole thing right down, make it more easy to manage and a safer bet all round. Based on everything I've said, Macy's shares are down 1.2% at the moment after that news came out.
Let's move from shopping to cars, two of our favourite things here in the studio, by the way. Let's talk about Cazoo. This car sales platform has come to something of an emergency stop.
I know. I see what you did there. Yes, the thing about Cazoo is it's a UK company, but it trades here in New York. I'm not entirely sure why that is, but anyway, it's been trading here in New York since 2021, and they have really funky TV adverts. The tagline is always, "Can you get a car that you love from the internet?" Cazoo, yeah, you can. That's what they say. Cazoo, yeah, you can. And they offer thousands of used cars. They'll give you a 300-point inspection, and then you can either go to their depot and pick it up, or they'll send it in a natty little van with Cazoo on the side. And it was a darling of the COVID era. Remember when we were all stuck in our basements betting against Wall Street here and buying cars with our stimulus money left and right? Well, that's why Cazoo did so very well. When they came to market here, they were worth $7 billion. They're now worth $30 million, so they're basically bust. That is the problem. problem. And essentially, they came here as what they call a SPAC, which is a special purpose acquisition company. In very simple terms, normally when you come to market, certainly in New York, you hire investment banks, there's a roadshow, you get introduced to all the movers and shakers, and then the IPO happens. And to cut a long story short, a SPAC is basically a massively simplified way of coming to market. It cuts lots of corners. And many of the SPACs that we've had in the last couple of years have not done so well. And now Kazoo is one of those as well. Now, they have tried to reorganize. We know that. This has been coming for some time. They've stalled stock. They've tried to, appeal to the dealership businesses in the UK more, all that kind of stuff. But they're really out of time now. And I understand there's a relatively limited number of people looking to buy them, although somebody will, because it's a fire sale now, and 700 to 1,000 jobs, something like that, will end up going.
John, before you go, one more thing I wanted to ask you about. The head of JP Morgan has been speaking out.
Oh, yes. Well, there's only really one bank in America that anybody cares about. It's called JP Morgan Chase, and Jamie Dimon is the head of it. Now, he's an economist, he's a banker, he's a politician, and he's a populist. People like him. He speaks his mind. And if he were ever to run for president, he'd probably win. But I don't think he will be running for president. Yesterday, he said three things that Wall Street pricked up its ears to. One is no share buyback at the price the share is at the moment. And Wall Street took that as a bad sign and sold off to the tune of almost 5%. He also talked about his succession. He's hinted deeply now that he may go at 70 2 years from now and not 5 years from now, which everybody here was expecting. And he also referred to the global economic outlook as cautiously pessimistic. Now, when Dimon speaks, normally people listen. However, at the moment, nobody is in the mood for listening to cautiously pessimistic. No, thank you very much. It's buy here. Everyone's buying. Everyone wants to get in. And that is based on NVIDIA earnings coming up tomorrow, strong first quarterly earnings, and the likelihood of 1 or 2 interest rate cuts now before the end of the year, all of which, deep breath, leaves us with the Dow in the green, but not really by very much, and the same with the S&P 500, and that is because they're slightly nervous about NVIDIA's earnings, which come out after the bell on Wednesday. Rob?
John, thank you very much. Our correspondent, John Terrett, in Wall Street.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, French President Emmanuel Macron heads to New Caledonia as foreigners flee the worst unrest in the Pacific territory in more than 30 years.
What do we mean when we talk about the difference?
Brazen axe.
The difference is in the detail, the background,
Defense ministers from
the wider angle and perspective of every story. Wherever the story may be. CGTN. See the difference.
We are all connected. Across borders, across continents, connected by ideas, a shared humanity. Stay connected.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Robin Dwyer. Our top stories: at least 7 Palestinians killed as Israeli troops raid the West Bank city of Jenin.
Tens of thousands of people lined the streets for the funeral procession of Iran's President Ibrahim Raisi, killed on Sunday in a helicopter crash.
Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky will remain in office despite his 5-year term having expired. Elections have been postponed because of the war. Our correspondent Megumi Lim reports now from Kyiv.
Right now, any elections are prohibited in Ukraine due to martial law. That's according to the country's constitution. But even if Ukraine found a way to change the law, voting would have been difficult for many citizens. Millions of Ukrainians fled the country when the conflict began in 2022, and hundreds of thousands more are fighting on the front lines. Most of the country's tax revenue currently goes to its defense, which means funding an election would also have been challenging.
According to a poll conducted by the Kyiv Institute of Sociology in February, 69% of respondents supported Zelensky remaining in office for as long as martial law was in place.
5 years ago, a fresh-faced Zelensky won in a landslide victory with more than 73% of the vote, the largest tally in the country's history. And his trust rating remains high at 65%. Many are saying a leadership change now would be disruptive.
There will be a mess here. People will fight, who is better, Zelensky or another candidate.
Since the situation is now very unstable, especially as Russian troops are already trying to storm Kharkiv and Sumy in the east and break through further, I believe that it is not the right time for elections. It is not what we should be doing now. Instead of being united and acting against the enemy, should we discuss whether to keep the president or replace him? To me, this question should be resolved after our victory.
But critics say the lack of elections could hurt Ukraine's democracy.
So its situation is sort of, I would say, social and maybe political frustration, because people have no chance, no proper civil chance to affect, to impact on the authorities.
Political opponents have criticized the government's decision to stop broadcasting parliamentary procedures. And the current government-led news programming, which broadcasts a united message on the conflict, has drawn criticism that it drowns out diverse voices. Opposition leader Alexei Goncharenko suggests Zelensky should find a way to distribute power even to his political opponents.
Because we can't have elections, it would be very wise move from the President Zelensky if he would create national unity government, giving possibility to all political forces to be part of the government.
When Zelensky took office 5 years ago, he promised to end the conflict in the east against separatists. Instead, he has become a wartime leader, with no end in sight to the fight, and now his presidency. Megumi Lim, CGTN, Kyiv.
France's President Emmanuel Macron is heading to New Caledonia after the worst unrest in the French Pacific territory in 30 years. Proposed changes to electoral laws sparked days of riots which left 6 people dead and forced the evacuation of foreign nationals from the island. Well, let's talk to our correspondent Ross Cullen, who's in Paris. So, Ross, what are President Macron's plans when he arrives?
Hi, Robin. He's going to set up a mission of dialogue, according to the government spokesperson speaking a little bit earlier. Emmanuel Macron also going to thank the security forces and the armed forces who've been working to try to secure areas around ports and the airport, working to protect public buildings as well. And he's going in a, quote, spirit of responsibility, according to the government spokesperson. So Emmanuel Macron will be travelling with the Defence Secretary, Sebastian Augustin Lecornu and the Interior Minister, Gérald Darmanin, along with the Minister for Overseas Territory, Marie Guévenoux. Now, we heard earlier from Gérald Darmanin, speaking before he gets on that plane to New Caledonia, the Interior Minister saying there will be 4 more flights going in the next 48 hours to New Caledonia, with 3,000 more additional security personnel to try to get a handle on the situation on the island. And speaking earlier as well, Gabriel Attal, the Prime Minister, did say that the situation is starting to improve in terms of the state trying to regain control of all of the island of New Caledonia, the French overseas territory in the Pacific Ocean, where there have been riots and civil unrest for more than a week now.
So President Macron arriving, security personnel arriving, but many other people leaving. What about those evacuation flights?
Yeah, there have been some evacuation flights. Australia and New Zealand have sent a couple of planes to return some of their nationals from the island, people working there, people on holiday there. We know that those have been sent by the respective armed forces because, Robin, there are no commercial flights going at the moment to or from New Caledonia. The airport is closed to commercial traffic for a good while yet before the situation can fully be restored, before the situation can be secured and flights can once again run into and out of the island. But the overall situation, we've seen more than 250 people arrested for rioting. The Justice Secretary saying that the state is going to impose the harshest penalties and sanctions it has for people who've been rioting and looting. More than 400 businesses have been damaged in some way, mostly by fire, and 150 of those have had their stocks looted. All of this related to contentious voting reform that would see the extension of voting rights to people who've been resident on the island for at least 10 years, French residents moving to the island and then being able to vote in local elections, which the indigenous New Caledonians, native Kanak, feel that could be a diluting of their vote. They make up around 40% of the population of nearly 300,000 people who live on New Caledonia.
Ross, thank you very much. Our correspondent Ross Cullen in Paris.
The UK government has pledged a comprehensive compensation package for the victims of the infected blood scandal, described as the worst treatment disaster in the history of the National Health Service.
It comes a day after a public inquiry found that the government and NHS were culpable, with evidence of a cover-up. More than 30,000 people were infected from 1970 to 1991 by contaminated blood products and transfusions.
The Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, has issued an apology and promised compensation with no limit to the total cost. Well, our correspondent Yolo Abdavith has been following the story. So we think 30,000 people infected, 40 years for the truth to finally come out. Is compensation going to be enough for all these families affected?
And around 3,000 deaths from those 30,000 people affected, because it's not just individuals but families as well. I think that remains to be seen, probably because the details that were said in Parliament today by a minister from the government didn't actually give a figure, but it's thought to be around $12 to $13 billion. Whether it will be as much, maybe it'll be more. But what will be interesting is how soon, how quickly the government and civil service and the National Health Service can move to try and now mitigate this after so many years, 40 years as you say, where there has been a cover-up by civil service, by the National Health Service, as well as politicians and countless health ministers in various governments. So whether indeed they can assess people and families individually to make out and try and organise before the end of the year how much can be paid to certain people. There are interim payments in the meantime, and some of them are, you know, $250,000, $260,000. But these are interim payments, not the final payments. So it depends how quickly they can go. And just to recap on this infected blood, what it meant, from the 1970s onwards, blood transfusion and plasma were given to people across the globe, including here in Britain, which had been infected with hepatitis and later with HIV, which led to AIDS. And there was a complacency, and I think that came out quickly and quite comprehensively when this report was published, all 2,500 pages of it, 7 volumes of a report that had been worked on for the last 6 years. The UK doesn't move quickly. So I think it depends how quickly these compensation payouts can be made, especially given the obfuscation, the dishonesty, the cover-up, and that's what I think people will be really looking at.
So we've had the release of this report following the public inquiry, but that's not the end, is it? What could the impact of those findings be?
Well, I think as people, and especially families and relatives, are looking at the language of this report, the subtle, pervasive and chilling cover-up, I think that that's why, late in the day, but in Parliament, Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, he said, well, we will pay the compensation, whatever the cost. And, you know, he did say that this was a shameful chapter in the history of the United Kingdom, and his apology was listened to across the House.
This is a day of shame for the British state. The report shows a decades-long moral failure at the heart of our national life. From the National Health Service to the civil service, to ministers in successive governments, at every level, the people and institutions in which we place our trust failed in the most harrowing and devastating way.
And I think it's quite indicative that he did actually mention, you know, the civil service, the National Health Service, the managers, as well as politicians.
So if this public inquiry finds the government and the NHS were culpable, what does this mean for prosecutions? Will there be prosecutions?
Well, the United Kingdom has been slower than the United States, Denmark, Italy, Japan, in terms of how they've dealt with this, in terms of paying out compensation, in terms of prosecution and accountability. And I was just checking to see, you know, who has actually been found accountable, and it is the health minister in France was convicted in 1999. Then I looked at how many health ministers we've had in the UK, and in that period, 70s, 80s and 90s, we're talking about 15 to 20 health ministers. Some of them were health ministers for 3, 4 and 5 years. So those ministers and former ministers might be held accountable. We shall see.
Yolo, thank you very much. Our correspondent, Yolo Abdavid. Well, I've been speaking to Kate Burt, the chief executive of the Haemophilia Society, and she told me the public might be shocked by this report, but the victims are not.
It was a seismic day yesterday in London with the publication of the Infected Blood Inquiry report. It's taken 4 decades of campaigning to get to that day, and I know members of the public in the UK will be deeply shocked by its findings. The Prime Minister yesterday called it a national day of shame for the British state, but unfortunately everybody in the haemophilia and bleeding disorder community have known for 4 decades that wrong was done and that it was covered up. So we weren't shocked, but we were very relieved that the report has vindicated the campaigners.
As you say, it's a decades-long scandal. In brief, how did this happen?
The UK government took the decision to start importing blood products from overseas, and mainly from the United States of America, which had a dangerously unregulated donation system where they were paying people to donate their blood, targeting prisons in Louisiana and Arkansas, and pooling plasma from tens of thousands of donors. And all it would take is one donor to have a virus such as hepatitis or HIV for the entire pool to be contaminated. People with haemophilia and bleeding disorders need to have infusions maybe 1 or 2 times a week to help their blood clot. So essentially, we were importing poisoned blood and giving it to people with haemophilia and other bleeding disorders and condemning them to almost certain infection.
The UK government has finally earmarked perhaps £10 billion for compensation, but can any payout ever really compensate for the loss of life?
It can't. 6,000 people with haemophilia and bleeding disorders were infected. Many more members of the public were infected through blood transfusions in hospitals. 3,000 people have died so far, and people are dying every week. Parents lost children, children lost parents, husbands, wives. People died in the most horrible of circumstances. And through all of that time, the government was telling us that no wrong had been done. Yesterday, that was proved to be a lie. We have a paternalistic culture in the UK that has got to change. And the fact that saving reputations and saving money rather than saving lives was seen as more important has to change. It's a moment where the culture of the UK has to shift.
9 alleged leaders of a far-right plot to overthrow Germany's government have gone on trial in Frankfurt. The group includes a self-declared prince, a former judge and retired military officers. They're accused of high treason and terrorism after planning to storm Parliament in 2022 and detain legislators, then seize power. They deny all the charges. The case involves more than 24 suspects and 260 witnesses.
Spain says it's recalling its Argentinian ambassador over comments made by the president, Javier Milei. Milei accused the Spanish Prime Minister, Pedro Sanchez's wife, of being corrupt. Allegations against Begoña Gomez led to a crisis within the Spanish government last month that saw Sanchez threaten to resign. Prosecutors have since dropped any investigations. Milei says he will not withdraw or apologise for his comments.
The UK's Foreign Minister, David Cameron, has told MPs that British nationals arriving into the overseas territory of Gibraltar could be turned away. The new post-Brexit treaty that's currently under negotiation could see guards from the EU's border agency Frontex stationed at the airport. The deal's aimed at removing identification checks at the border between Spain and Gibraltar.
A 73-year-old British man has died after a flight from London to Singapore was hit by severe turbulence. The Singapore Airlines plane was forced to make an emergency landing in Bangkok, where medical teams treated dozens of other passengers who were injured. Those on board said the turbulence caused some passengers not wearing seatbelts to hit the overhead cabins.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. A bitter battle for craft breweries in the United States as small businesses call last orders.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
Unprecedented scenes that we saw. The cleanup operation is now well and truly underway.
Parts of southern Europe remain in a state of emergency.
Context gives meaning. People make history.
Far more than 1,000 people have come here today.
But authorities are still on high alert.
So now we've actually become the border on this road.
A complex world demands a comprehensive view.
But with the cleanup efforts more or less under control,
the economic impact is bound to ripple across the country.
There's plastic pollution everywhere.
Because the world today matters for your world tomorrow.
This is the living area of the crew.
The focus is firmly on future technologies.
Well, this is something completely different.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. Once a thriving industry, craft beer in the United States is facing severe challenges as small breweries close.
Those that remain open are cutting costs while also calling for changes to outdated regulations. Our correspondent Nisa Soledad Perez reports.
Once seen as a flourishing industry, U.S. craft breweries were popping up everywhere. But now, some are closing in South Florida. And analysts say it's part of a national trend. U.S. craft breweries are struggling to survive.
About 10 years ago, you could open up a craft brewery and it was like a license to print money. Now you have to pay really close attention to your bottom line, how much you're spending on ingredients, just with the changing interest rates. Inflation has impacted ingredient costs, and then just general climate change with the quality of the ingredients too. So we're having in some cases having to buy more to get the same effect on some of the ingredients.
Across the U.S., 495 new breweries opened last year, while 418 closed, contributing to a negative production trend in the craft beer industry. Greg Burvis, the head brewer at Bay 13 Brewery and Kitchen in Coral Gables, has noted a shift in consumer spending habits.
People are being a bit more discerning about where they're spending their money.
But there are myriad factors affecting small breweries, says Tim Dornblaser, partner at Nova Brewery in Boynton Beach. South Florida continues to lead the nation with the highest inflation rate.
We saw a 50% rent increase January 1, and it's not like we can pick up and just move. I mean, we've got a lot of money into a build out and setting up manufacturing, and we can't just pick up and move, so we're stuck. And we've seen a rise in the cost of cans, rise in the price of our raw materials, and we've hit a point where there's only so much we can charge for a beer. You know, nobody's going to come in and pay $10 for a 16-ounce beer that they can go back to a macro of Budweiser or Miller Lite or something like that they can buy for a fraction.
Also, Florida's laws and licensing agreements are not friendly to small breweries. In the state of Florida, this establishment is forced to sell their beer to a distributor who then sells it to other restaurants, leading to additional fees.
Not a great pour.
Florida brewers are advocating for updates to the state's regulations, particularly the three-tiered system of alcoholic beverage laws, to modernize the industry.
We're trying to get some sort of make sense self-distribution going on and then change licensing fees, because we are one of the more highly taxed states in the U.S. for craft beer production.
They acknowledge that pushing this new bill is like climbing the Hops Mountain.
We're fighting big beer, and they have a lot more lobbying power up there than we do, a lot deeper checkbooks than we have. We're in it for the long haul, so we have every intention of fighting till the end, so we think we're going to make it through.
Nisa Soledad Perez, CGTN, Miami.
One of China's renowned crafts is embroidery. It's a tradition stretching back more than 2,000 years. Our correspondent Ding Se-Yue reports.
Silk thread butterflies flap their wings and seem like they're about to break free of the frame. Crafted by Zhang Xue, this mesmerizing work reflects his innovative approach to the age-old art of Su embroidery.
As our lifestyles evolve, we must redefine Su embroidery's relevance. I have proposed a project dubbed the Possibility Experiment of Su Embroidery as a means to explore its contemporary contributions.
The magic is made possible courtesy of shape memory alloys, a new kind of material that lets them transform and revert back to their original form as the temperature changes. That's why the butterflies respond to the warmth of a person's touch.
For movement to occur, technical prerequisites such as fabric heat resistance, trigger sensitivity, and speed variance must all align. Overcoming these challenges offers a sense of clarity and openness.
Ever keen on infusing innovation into Su embroidery's traditional framework, Zhang Xue once embarked on a laborious project called Starry Sky, incorporating 24 different stitching techniques to depict galaxies and other cosmic systems. After 8 months, his vision materialized.
By using different techniques, the decorative effect is stronger, the luster is better, and it resembles the feeling of planetary orbits.
While on the path of innovating Su embroidery, Zhang has incorporated it into films and games, attracting many young enthusiasts of traditional culture to join him.
在微博上面，还有以及一些其他。
I saw Teacher Zhang's videos on Weibo and other platforms and was immediately impressed. I especially love traditional Chinese culture, and the combination of craftsmanship and modern innovation really appeals to me.
There are about 5 or 6 young people here in our studio, all in their 20s and 30s, all university graduates. We hope more young people will join us.
Zhang Xue said he hopes to introduce Su embroidery to more people, allowing them to appreciate the beauty of this intangible cultural heritage. Ding Xue, CGTN.
And finally, now you see it, now you don't. That's the case if you're in the town overlooking one of Japan's most famous tourist attractions, Mount Fuji. Japan's highest peak has always been a major draw for visitors, but a tourism boom combined with a refusal to obey littering and traffic rules from tourists has become a bit of a nuisance for locals. People in the small town at the foot of Mount Fuji decided enough was enough and have erected a barrier to block visitors from stopping to take photographs.
The headlines again. At least 7 Palestinians killed as Israeli troops raid the West Bank city of Jenin.
Our other headlines, tens of thousands of people line the streets for the funeral procession of Iran's President Ebrahim Raisi, killed on Sunday in a helicopter crash.
And French President Emmanuel Macron heads to New Caledonia as foreigners flee the worst unrest in the Pacific Territory in more than 30 years.
And that's it for Global Business Europe. Thank you for watching.
There's more on all our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Facebook, Instagram and TikTok.
And you can go to CGTN Europe's channel on the Telegram app or scan the QR code on the screen to get stories and updates sent direct to your phone.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow. Same time, same place. From all of the team here in London, it's goodbye.
Goodbye.